Hello, historians, and welcome to another Purple Shirt History. We're going to be breaking some new ground today, as we've done a lot of IGCSE videos, and I believe it's time to kind of move on to the A-level portion of what we're going to do. Don't worry if you're in IGCSE, we're still going to do a lot more videos about different depth studies, different content, some more exam technique stuff, but I wanted to get the ball rolling on the A-level portion of the Cambridge exams. And this is a deep dive of the AS section of A-level history. So this is paper 1 and paper 2. This is going to be a longer video, but please bear with me. There's a lot of good information within it as I kind of talk you through the different aspects of the AS. AL is the second part of the A-level program. That's papers 3 and 4. We'll deal with that on another day. This is a lot of information just to kind of talk about paper 1 and paper 2. And of course, if you could also like, comment, subscribe, enable the notifications, and share the channel, it really does help me out, and I appreciate it greatly. So with that, let's begin the video into the deep dive of AS history. So as with the IGCSE deep dive video, we're going to go straight to the source and look at the syllabus. The syllabus contains both the AS and the AL aspects of the A-level course. In this video, we're just going to go over the AS part. In a future video, we'll go over AL. I do believe that the AS is a bit more difficult for students because it's a big jump from IGCSE. Is something you're going to have to contend with and really raise your game in order to do well. I'm just going to skip by some pages because you can read those on your own. This is going to be quite a long video. Don't need to make it any longer than it needs to be by going through each and every page. So let's just get down to the table of contents. And we see here all of the things that we've, again, seen previously in the IGCSE deep dive video. Please check that out. Paper 1 is a document question. Paper 2 is the essay question. And for AL, paper 3 is the document question, and paper 4 is the essay question. I do find that the paper 1 sources question isn't massively more difficult than the IGCSE sources question, paper 2. But looking at the essay questions, at AS, the paper 2 question is a lot more involved than the IGCSE paper 1. So you really need to have a big improvement in your essay writing and time management skills in order to do very well. I mentioned the School Support Hub, and it is a wonderful resource with lots of different documents to improve your scores. So if you haven't noticed any of the past papers or schemes of work or student learner guides or anything like that, please contact your teacher and request them. Here we are, content overview, and the 3 options that we have. I'm going to go through them one by one. European option, Modern Europe, 1750 to 1921. This is the one I've taught the most, and this is the one I like the best, because I just love the French Revolution. We're going to do videos on the French Revolution. It's fascinating. It's incredibly difficult and complex, but that's the fun part. You don't want to do easy stuff now, do you? France, 1774 to 1814, that is the first part of the European option. Then the Industrial Revolution in Britain, 1750 to 1850. This is a huge, pleasant surprise for me, having to teach the Industrial Revolution. I thought it was going to be very boring and very technical, but it's an amazing topic. I can't really stress how fun it is to teachers that may be a little hesitant, thinking, oh, this is just about cotton mills and stuff like that. No, you can really link it to the modern world and the different industrial revolutions. Liberalism and nationalism in Germany. I think they're bringing this back. The liberalism and nationalism in Germany wasn't part of the syllabus, so this will be a new aspect for the this particular syllabus. And then the Russian Revolution, 1894 to 1921. For those of you that do the Russian depth study, this will be quite easy. For those of you that do not do the Russian depth study, don't worry. It is a smaller time period than that depth study, so you only have to focus on a few things. Basically, from the end of the 20th century to the Soviet takeover of the Russian Empire. The American option, the history of the USA, 1820 to 1941. I've not taught this in my AS class, but I have taught AP US history, and I am a Cambridge assessor, so I have marked these papers. I can easily go through the US option as well, so I'm going to do videos on that. And this is much more condensed than you would get in an AP class. This is just talking about pre-Civil War up to Pearl Harbor. The origins of the Civil War, 1820 to 1861. So you have to know the different types of compromises and the different aspects of what was going on with sectionalism and stuff like that. Civil War and Reconstruction, and the Gilded Age and Progressive Era, very interesting topics. The Gilded Age was a term by Mark Twain to show the kind of economic boom that was just a kind of a patina for a lot of the problems in America at the time that led to the Progressive Era, all the corruption and businesses basically hiring people to beat up workers and stuff like that. And all of this came to a head in the Progressive Era, and we see this leading up to World War I and Woodrow Wilson. Then we have the Great Crash, Great Depression, and New Deal policies. I think that last bullet point for the American option has the most questions across IGCSE in different aspects, in the international option and in different depth studies and stuff. So 1920 to 1941, if you know that, you'll be able to answer so many questions across different themes. So definitely going to have a deeper look at that. Lastly is the international option. This is what I'm teaching now. Empire and the Emergence of World Powers, 1870 to 1919. So this is European expansionism and colonialism, mainly in Africa and in Asia. We see the French and the British control huge swaths of Africa. We see the emergence of Germany after it becomes a united country to try to take over some parts of Africa. And this eventually leads to the Berlin Conference in 1885 and a lot of alliances and things that come to a head and lead to World War I. League of Nations and international relations in the 20s and 30s. This is very well-worn material from IGCSE, so go back and watch those IGCSE videos. Those are a good primer, and then we'll make other videos in greater detail for A-level depth. And then the last one is China and Japan, 1912 to 1945. So we see the emergence of Japan as a world power, and then we see the end of the Qing dynasty in China and all of the events that follow that. Again, just going to skip by the paper 3 and paper 4. You could take a look at those topics if you want to pause it, but that's for another day. All right, now going on to the overview of the assessment. Paper 1, document question, you'll get an hour and 15 minutes. It's a 40 marker. There is one question with multiple documents. Candidates must answer both parts of a question, so there'll be an A, a B, and maybe a C. And this is externally assessed. It's sent to an assessor by Cambridge. And what you're going to do, you could have visual documents, you could have written documents. It's very familiar to you if you've taken IGCSE. And just like in the IGCSE, you'll have a question at the end that says, look at all of the sources and make a conclusion. So we'll do a paper 1 video eventually. And like I said, it's not a giant leap from IGCSE. You just really, if you know how to do sources, it's a skill that you'll have for the rest of your life. So learn how to do it properly early on, and then every source you see thereafter will be a piece of cake because you'll be able to deconstruct the source, you'll be able to see what the messages are, you'll look at the background details, the sub-messages. If you look at the provenance very carefully, you'll be able to kind of get a good understanding of what the purpose and what all these other aspects in that particular source are. On to paper 2. Like I said, this is the difficult one. This is where we're going to have to really burn some lean tissue in terms of studying hard, doing a lot of reading, and then having really concise, great essays. Hour and 45 minutes, 60 marker, 2 questions. Candidates answer 2 two-part questions. It's an A and a B. So you can't pick and choose between the different questions. If you choose a question, you need to answer the A and the B, answer both parts, and it's externally assessed. So this is 60% of your AS level. And if you do AL, it's 30% overall. So again, difficult, but doable. I think a lot of you should not be intimidated by this. If you put the time in, you'll be able to have a great result. Assessment objectives. These are the skills. Again, you can just pause this for a little bit. I'm not going to read all this out, but these are the things that you need to demonstrate in order to score well. Here's the weighing for the different aspects, like we said before. Much like IGCSE, there is a rotation of topics for the paper 1 for the documents question. France. All right, here we go, my fave. So what you need to do is read this very thoroughly. Look at the key question and then the content, these little subpoints here. The Ancien regime is the French monarchy, the absolute monarchy of Louis XVI. So this is something that you need to look at in terms of long-term causes of the revolution, medium-term causes, and then immediate causes. I'm going to include a link to Revolutions podcast by Mike Duncan and the French Revolution because it is amazing. It is the best work that I think he did. It's overkill for sure. It's about 55 episodes or so, but if you really listen to it, say you're going to take AS next year and you have the summer, if you listen to a few episodes every few days, you'll be able to listen to the whole series going into your AS year, and you'll have this amazing wealth of knowledge on the French Revolution just by listening to a free podcast. And then we see things like the Terror, we see all of the wars that France gets involved in, and this all culminates with the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte through the Directory, through his military victories, and then we see the French Empire being born. So again, awesome theme. Really, any true historian needs to know the French Revolution inside and out. The Industrial Revolution, another awesome topic for those doing the European option. It is the creation of the modern world. So humans lived basically unchanged for thousands and thousands of years, agricultural-based societies, and only within the past few hundred years, we've seen our entire species reorganize itself because of this Industrial Revolution. Steam power, machines, going from muscle power to steam power, that's a major theme of the Industrial Revolution. So looking at the improvements the Industrial Revolution brought, but also some of the drawbacks that the Industrial Revolution brought. We see massive pollution, inequality, child labor, political unrest, class systems being formed and becoming very rigid. It leads to the birth of the British Empire, which is connected to the other things in this theme. And it's a very, very fascinating topic. I can't really recommend it enough. Here we are with the liberalism and nationalism in Germany. This was part of the AS years ago. I want to say pre-COVID. That seems like forever ago. This was part of the AS for a while, and then it was taken out, and now it's being put back in. Before, I believe it was the unification of Germany and Italy. So there were themes about Bismarck and Garibaldi and these types of people for Germany and Italy. But now it's just liberalism and nationalism in Germany, the unification of Germany, and then what's going on with the revolutions of 1848. Again, a Revolutions podcast, great series on the revolutions of 1848, the unsuccessful revolutions of 1848, we should say. Points you can read out. And if none of these terms look very familiar to you, you can just do some basic Googling about the Frankfurt Parliament. What's that? You can talk about the Zollverein. These are also key terms. The humiliation of Olmütz, Austria, Prussia, these types of German states. Bismarck, he's the key figure in German unification. And how did he do it? Well, you can look at the wars that he fought. Iron and blood was his quote, and you can see how Germany was unified. Creation of the German Empire in 1871 has huge consequences for Europe and for the world. You can, again, just do some preliminary research, and then when you look at the textbooks that you get, the access to history books, for example, or seminar series, or whatever your teacher gives you, these are the things that by the time you get your textbook, you should know a lot already, and it'll make reading that textbook quite easy. Last thing for the European option is the Russian Revolution. Leading up to the revolution of 1905 and seeing how there was a lot of problems in Russia, repression by the Tsar, failed war, and how the Japanese inflict horrible losses on Russia, and it leads to this revolution of 1905. Then we see what were the causes of immediate outcomes of the February Revolution. So during World War I, it proves that the Tsarist Russian Empire is not fit for this modern warfare. The February Revolution is the provisional government taking over from the Tsar, and then the October Revolution is the Bolsheviks overthrowing the provisional government and consolidating their power up to 1921. So again, there's a lot of keywords here in the syllabus. Lenin, Bolsheviks, Trotsky, MRC, October Revolution, Brest-Litovsk, Kronstadt, war communism, civil war. So when you're looking at the syllabus, underline all the things that you are not familiar with. So if you've never seen the Military Revolutionary Committee, go, oh, don't know what that means. Underline it, go Google it, and then in the side, you can write some notes to kind of just give you a little bit of a primer, a little bit of a beginning seed of knowledge to research more. On to the U.S., origins of the Civil War. Slavery, this is, I would say, over half of the questions I've ever seen about the U.S. option are about slavery. And then you'll see things about westward expansion, about Missouri Compromise, Bleeding Kansas, all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, again, look at all the keywords, the Mexican-American War, who John Brown was, slave power, the Dred Scott case. In the European option, it's a lot of battles, Napoleon and Lenin and Bismarck and all this kind of stuff, a lot of wars. It's a lot of court cases in the American option. You'll see that, the U.S. was founded by lawyers. So a lot of debates, a lot of cases like Dred Scott, the fugitive slave law, these types of things, which lead then to violence and John Brown. Key questions. Why did the Civil War last for 4 years? You need to know what the strengths and weaknesses of the North and the South were. The North basically had unlimited industrial strength compared to the agricultural South, much more railroads, bigger population. When I was in high school, the thing that they taught us was that the South just needed not to lose. They needed to basically get the North to quit, and they had strong military leadership with Robert E. Lee. So it was a strategy of basically getting the North to no longer have the will to reunify the country and to have their slave Confederate States of America. Resources available, foreign influence, why did Britain not get involved? And how did the war affect Britain? There was a cotton famine, they said, in the textile mills in northern England because of the blockade by the Union against the Confederacy. After the North wins the Civil War, we see Reconstruction, how Abraham Lincoln is assassinated, and Andrew Johnson is a terrible president, and we see how Reconstruction fails. But we do see the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment with slaves getting the right to citizenship, the right to vote, and so on and so forth. So we see the integration of slaves, people that were property, into citizens who have rights. How successful was Reconstruction? Well, I just said it was a gigantic failure, but since this is Cambridge, we need to show balance. So there were military districts in the South that were, up until 1877, under Union control, but then we start to see the emergence of the Ku Klux Klan. We see the emergence of people trying to subjugate black people into their bottom of society, and we see how Reconstruction really was not a success. But you can't say it's a complete failure because, again, I said this is Cambridge. You need to show some of the aspects of Reconstruction that worked, such as the enfranchisement and some of the other aspects that you'll read about when you study it. The Gilded Age and Progressive Era, 1870s to 1920. The Age of Industrialization, trusts, corporations, robber barons. So you need to know people like John D. Rockefeller, like Andrew Carnegie, like Leland Stanford, all of these guys that were the billionaires of their time, using monopolies and dirty tricks and stock market manipulation and all this kind of stuff. But this is also a period of explosive economic growth. For the U.S., we see the U.S. reaching all the way to California. So the coast-to-coast country and the frontier disappearing. We see the pushback against all this corruption with the progressive movement. We see women lobbying hard for the right to vote, for temperance and prohibition, about having America reduce its alcohol consumption because people were drinking a lot back then. We see the regulation of private corporations, trust busting, the Sherman Antitrust Act, and these types of things. So know what the progressive movement wanted. Upton St. Clair, The Jungle, is a book that you should know that can be used as evidence in a lot of answers about the meatpacking industry. We see the advent of photography for journalistic purposes, showing child labor. And this is very upsetting to the public, so the public calls for reforms. The Great Crash, the Great Depression, and the New Deal, 1920 to 1941. What were the reasons for the Great Crash? I mean, there's a ton of them, so we're not asking you to be some kind of Wall Street historian, but there was a lot of hype. There was a lot of people getting into the stock market and pushing up prices and borrowing on margin, which means taking out loans to buy stock. And it all was a very bubblicious market. And we start to see, once the market gets to this irrational exuberance point, it has nowhere to go but down. But for a while, the Roaring 20s, we saw a lot of new markets being formed. Things like refrigerators, things like the automobile, things like entertainment industries, baseball becomes very popular, films, all this type of stuff. And then after the crash, we see a lot of destitution and massive unemployment. So the answer to what is the biggest problem of the Great Depression, it's a one-word answer, and it is unemployment. Not just in America, but in places like Germany and Japan and around the world. Everywhere you go, during the Depression, governments are grappling with unemployment. And this leads to FDR being elected in 1933. We see the New Deal, which is mainly about, like I said, employment, getting people back to work, getting people earning money again, and trying to instill some hope in people that the government is actually trying to fix the problem. Looking at all the banks to see which ones will survive. The FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, is set up. And there's a raft of reforms in the New Deal and under Roosevelt. Social Security being one of the most popular ones that's still around today and still probably the most popular program for elderly Americans and Americans overall. So lots to go over in that U.S. theme. The international option, empire and the emergence of world powers. Why was imperialism a significant force in the late 19th century Europe? You're going to need to know why the Europeans wanted to create these empires. mainly to create markets for themselves because they had a lot of excess production that couldn't be absorbed in the domestic market. So as they go through their industrial revolutions, they need to have new markets. We start to see this thing called the scramble for Africa. Africa is home to hundreds of millions of people. It has enormous resources at this time, still has enormous resources. So we see raw resources and markets are a main aim. And overall, European countries just don't want to fall behind each other. It's a bit of an arms race between the European countries. If you don't participate in this imperialism and other countries do, you will become weaker, and then you yourself will be under threat of colonization down the road. A lot of attention for Japan here and how Japan goes from being an isolated country in the mid-1850s to massively and rapidly industrializing, and to the point where they actually incur great losses on Russia and start to expand territorially in the Pacific Ocean and in mainland Asia. We see them take over Korea. We see them fight China a few times. And we see Japan becoming kind of a rising power in the same vein as the United States. Not an established power like the Europeans are, but in America and in Japan, these are seen as up-and-coming countries in terms of world power politics. The League of Nations and international relations in the 1920s, this is lifted pretty much directly from Chapter 2 of IGCSE. So look at your old notes about Chapter 2 and really see how you can expand upon them and go into greater depth so you can get the points at AS. Why was there dissatisfaction with the peace settlements of 1919-20? This is the paper 1 for this 2024 summer series. So I'm going over with my students different sources, treaties like the Locarno Treaty, the Dawes Plan, Kellogg-Briand Pact, and seeing how they affected international politics, talking about the successes of the League as well as the failures. In the 1930s, it's all failures for the League, but we do have a lot of successes in the 1920s. We have some goodwill and some optimism for this international organization. So it's not just all failures. There are failures. There is the Corfu incident with Mussolini, who is the main enemy of the League of Nations in the 20s. But we do see ups and downs, and it's a very rich topic, especially if you're doing the paper 1 with it. Just like I said, the 1920s is lifted from Chapter 2 of your IGCSE. The 1930s are lifted directly from Chapter 3. So all you need to do is have your notes from Chapter 3 of IGCSE as your base, and then you can build upon those in order to get those marks that you need. China and Japan, this is part of the syllabus here. Again, I'll just have you look through this. I'm not going to make any comments. Talked about Japan at length already. And here are the topics assessed in 2024. Like I said, if you're doing the European option, it's the Industrial Revolution in Britain. The American option, it's the Great Crash. And then my students will be doing the League of Nations in the 1920s. If you're looking forward to next year, you can see the change. For 2025, for European option, liberalism and nationalism in Germany, origins of the Civil War, and then League of Nations in the 30s for the international option. For the paper 1, let's just briefly go over what the Part A and Part B entails. Part A, candidates will be expected to consider 2 sources on one aspect of the material. A good starting point to look at is how similar or different are the sources. There's a high probability that your question will be some variant of that. How similar or how different are the sources? So whenever you're doing any practice with past papers, try to use that as your kind of starting point. How similar is source A to source B? Source B will look at all of the sources, and you'll have to look at each one individually, give an evaluation, and then look at all of them collectively, and then give an overall evaluation. Paper 2 is all about significance, significance, significance. You'll need to make 3 points and then have a conclusion, leveraging all of those points to show how significant something was concerning the question. To a small extent, it was minorly significant. To some extent, it was somewhat significant. To a large extent would then be it was largely or hugely or massively significant, something like that. Where Part B is more in-depth and balanced, and you need to show multiple points on each side. You're not listing significance 1, 2, 3 in order. You're showing both sides of the debate. The rest of the pages you could look at on your own time. As the video is quite long already, I don't need to go through each page. It shows what the grade boundaries are, A, B, C, U, X, all the different designations for grades. It talks about changes for the syllabus for each year and some other additional information given to you by Cambridge.